Okay, I should say good afternoon. Usually saying good morning, it's good afternoon. Thank you all for the little change in schedule. It's possible also that next Monday we'll be doing 12 o'clock as well. I will keep you updated on that, just because I'm teaching the boys from Israel now back, so we're learning in the morning. So my schedule got a little bit switched around, but I think only one more class, then we have Pesach. We'll take a break. We'll see how we do after that. Last week we concluded Shemuel Aleph with the death of Shaul in battle, and then moved into Shemuel Bet, which was David's reaction to the news that Shaul, passed away in battle and was killed in battle together with his three sons, including his best friend Yonatan. And we ended off with David's harsh reaction. We had a number of different questions that we needed to answer. So even if you weren't with us last week, I'll catch us up to speed. Basically, in the story where Shaul dies, what's told to us is that the Philistines surrounded Shaul. The archers were shooting, probably hit Shaul at one point. Shaul realized he and his sons were doomed, that they were going to lose in battle. Let's also not forget Shaul had a premonition of sorts from the woman who brought Shemuel back to life, that he knew he was going to lose in this battle. He fought it anyway, courageously, but knew this was going to be the end. Shaul, what's told to us at the time, turned to his arms bearer and said, "Kill me, so that I don't fall into the hands of the Philistines while I'm alive." The arms bearer refused to do so, having been afraid to commit an act of violence against the king, even though the king requested it. He refused, to which Shaul took the sword and killed himself. Fell on his sword and killed himself together with his children. At the sight of Shaul killing himself, the arms bearer kills himself. And they all die, and the Jewish people suffer a devastating loss at the hands of the Philistines. Many of the neighboring towns have to be evacuated. The Jewish people leave. The Philistines take it over. And basically, we said we're back to where we were at the very beginning before Shaul even became king. In other words, Shaul was put into place to free the Jewish people from the oppression of the Philistines and to rid their country of the Amalekim, both of which Shaul failed to do. The last thing that we knew before Shaul was crowned as king was the Jewish people had lost a battle to the Philistines and had the Aron confiscated. And that's when Eli HaKohen and his sons died, and we'll return back to these parallels. But basically, Shaul dies with his children. The Philistines have taken over again. And we're basically back to where we were before Shaul even became king. That's how Shemuel Aleph ended. We saw that the people of, there was one other little tidbit, which was, and it's important because we'll need it for the next chapter, the people of Yavesh Gilad, who were a people who were saved by Shaul. They come to the defense of Shaul's body, right? Shaul's body was being displayed by the Philistines in a mocking and derisive way. And they come in the middle of the night, they sneak in and they steal the body back. And we said they burnt it because of different reasons, but they basically gave Shaul a dignified post-mortem honoring. And that's how the book ended. That's how Shemuel Aleph ended, with the people of Yavesh Gilad sparing something of the dignity of Shaul and his children. We then read into chapter 1 of Shemuel Bet, where David receives the news. How does he receive the news? He receives the news from this one refugee from the battlefield. And this is where things got a little complicated. This refugee, right, comes to David. We could even take a look at a little bit of it in the Pesukim as we're going to go through. He comes to David, and his first words are, Vayomer elav Amaleki anochi. He tells him, I am a member of Amalek. And Shaul asked me to kill him. These are details that we didn't know. And he obliged. So basically, the story that's presented to us in the first chapter of Shemuel Bet is that Shaul fell on his sword to kill himself, but then asked this one Amalek young boy to finish off the job because he wasn't dying quickly enough or whatnot. He asked him to finish off the job, and this Amaleki boy did it. He killed him, and then the Amaleki boy took his crown and his arm bracelet and brought it to David HaMelech. That's the story that we're told, right? There's some incongruent details between the way the Navi the narrator first presents the death of Shaul to the way it's told to us at the beginning of Shemuel Bet from the mouth of this Amaleki boy who apparently was there and is claiming to have struck down Shaul at his request. Still with me? Yes, we saw this. Good. So how does David react to this boy from Amalek telling him this news? He's furious. How could you? David tells him, Emizeata. First he asks him, who are you from? Even though, by the way, he already told him as part of the story that he was from Amalek. But he tells him, I'm the son of a convert of a Ger Amaleki. David tells him, how were you not afraid to smite down the king of the Jewish people? You smote down the Shachetet Meshiach Adonai. You destroyed the anointed one of God. David calls one of his young men. He tells him, kill the Amaleki boy. And he does. He kills the Amaleki boy right on the spot. And David, in almost a callous way, says to him, you deserved it.
Why didn't David do it himself?
He calls on one of his, maybe he's the king now, he doesn't want to get his hands dirty, this is what kings do. He calls one of his young lads, he tells him, kill him. The young lad kills him right on the spot, shows his loyalty. And David tells it, after the body is there, dead, killed, he says, it was your fault. You did it because you testified about yourself that you killed the king. What? Right? He instructs the Na'ar to do it, but basically he has him killed, right? Who? Right, so we had a number of questions, right? There were, the arms bearer killed himself, but at least, what does David know? Right, the boy is saying that Shaul asked him to kill him. You can even read it again. If you look at, it's verse 9. The boy is telling this story in verse 9 of chapter 1 of Shemuel Bet. Vayomer Elai, he says, Shaul told me, Amod na alai umoteteni, stand over me and kill me. Ki ahazani hashavatz, because the injuries are too much for me to bear. Ki kol od nafshi bi, and my soul is about to leave me. In other words, Shaul knew he was going to die. Va'emod alav va'amoteteu, and now the Amaleki boy says, I did what he asked me to do. Ki yadati lo yichye aharen nifro, that he's not going to live. And then I brought the crown to you, and I brought you the armband, and here I am. Now, David doesn't know that the narrator told us a different story. This is what David is presented with, right? David is presented with this man from Amalek, this boy from Amalek, who at the battlefield was asked by Shaul to kill him. He obliged, and he's bringing him back the news together with the crown and the armband. And David, goes in, his reaction is very striking to us. There's a lot of questions that we left off with, right? Why is David treating this boy so harshly if the boy did what Shaul asked him to do? What should he have done? He asked him to kill him, and he said yes. Now, it's in stark contrast to the other way the story is told to us, that the arms bearer refused, and he took his own life at Shaul taking his life. So there's definitely a contrast there.
David asked him 2 questions before he ordered him dead?
Yeah.
How did it happen? Why would he ask you that? What was the circumstances?
That's not presented. That's not presented to us in the text. In the text, it's presented. Doesn't seem like there was. It seems like the boy tells him the news, and David says, if that's what you're testifying to, this is what has to be done. Well, what circumstances would have changed David's mind about this?
Maybe because he said I'm Amalek.
Okay, good. So there was a couple of different things. Right. So clearly the Amalek theme runs deep in this story. And let's not forget that Amalek has a past history with Shaul. So it was Amalek that was the last straw that caused the kingdom to be taken away from Shaul, because Shaul didn't kill Amalek. So how ironic is it, if we believe this story, that the last words Shaul ever heard before he died was Amalek, right? It's like a little goosebumpy, right? From the fact that the thing that brought Shaul down, the thing that caused his monarchy to be stripped away from him, was the fact that he didn't kill the people from Amalek. And who kills him, according to this story? Amalek kills him and is left, and that's the last words that he hears. It's pretty eerie, right? Definitely a little theme there, right? By the way, who did David just have a major victory over? In chapter 30 of Shemuel Aleph, Amalek, right? When David didn't go to battle against the Philistines, who did he go to battle with? Amalek, and he's victorious. That's that contrast that in areas where Shaul failed, David is victorious.
Is there, so Shaul obviously did not fulfill like the role. So now as a successor, is David now trying to rectify, not even in this case, is he supposed to rectify that anyone Amalek who comes across, there's supposed to be no more Amalek at this time? Should he be killing all of Amalek?
So that's the $1 million question, right? That's a good question. In many ways, we're seeing that David is, while not being under direct command from God, rectifying Shaul's missteps. Clearly, that's what's happening. It's happening almost on its own. David doesn't go to battle against the Philistines. He finds himself engaged in a war with Amalek, and he's successful, and he wins. God helps him to win. He now hears Amalek, and he once again is put into a fit of rage. Many people would understand the story as David responds so harshly to the fact that this is a person from Amalek, and that's what he's responding to, more so than the fact that he killed Shaul, but maybe using the concept of you killed Shaul as a cover-up to that idea. That's one approach. It's definitely possible. It's a possible approach to take. We'll see, maybe there's another approach on the other side. Yeah.
But didn't you say that this young boy who's Amalek was a convert now?
So true. Good.
Do you still look at him like Amalek?
So that hits to the heart of a debate that these two approaches have. The approach that I just presented, that Julie just presented, is the idea that there is no such thing as a convert from Amalek. The moment you hear the concept of Amalek, it's a non-starter for David. And because David has just come back from a war with Amalek and is now knowing that Shaul is dead because of Amalek, he's not prepared to tolerate any of this. And that's why he goes, pretty obscene.
Right.
That's one approach. Another approach is David would have tolerated this and it would have been fine. And we do accept converts from Amalek. There's only other nations.
The boy brought in the crown and whatever.
So we're going to talk about that. But the other approach is, in the end of the day, David is sending a very powerful message. This is what I think is a different takeaway. To me, it's the better, more important takeaway. David is sending a powerful message. What was the boy doing by presenting him the crown and the armband? How do we look at that? What was he doing? Hard to say he was victorious. Victorious for who? It's hard to say the Jewish people are victorious. But he's on the, let's assume for a minute, he's on the Jewish people side. He's a convert, he's part of the Jewish people side. Bingo. Right, he's kind of subtly, he's proving his loyalty, he's proving his Jewish, he's subtly sending the message to David, yes, Shaul is dead, but here you go. Here's the crown. There's something good coming out of this. You could take. He's gaining points. He's gaining favoritism. A few people mentioned, I think it was Liz, you mentioned it last week on the Zoom, that are there any opinions that say that the Amaleki boy made this up? The Radak says it. I don't know why I didn't look it up before that, but the Radak says it outright. He says, because of the differences in the details between the story that was presented to us in last chapter and the one that's presented us in this chapter, it makes sense to say this boy made it up. Now, why would he make up the idea that he killed Shaul? Because he thinks that will gain favor with him in David's eyes. This was David's arch enemy. Shaul was somebody who chased David. As long as Shaul was alive, David could not be king. He was the one who finalized it off, and he's presenting it to him and said, so this Amaleki boy is trying to gain favor in the eyes and say, look, something good happened. If David accepts that gift without giving any consequence to the Amaleki, what happens? People think, huh? Well, it sets a precedent for him. So maybe he sent him, maybe there's revenge. At the very least, if we don't want to go with that conspiracy, it's the idea that David at least relished in the moment that Shaul was dead. David has made every effort, not in a fake way, in a real way. David has consistently been of the mindset, Shaul is the king. He is the Mashiach Hashem. And David refuses to ever overstep his boundaries one iota. David had the opportunity to kill Shaul many times and refused to do it with the claim of, this is Mashiach Hashem. This is the anointed one. Sure. He tells him, you cannot stretch your hand out to the Mashiach Hashem. Now, part of that is because David has a tremendous amount of honor for Shaul and the position of Malchut. And a secondary thing is, as Liz pointed out, he wants that precedent to be set that you don't stretch your hand out against the king, no matter what you think about him. And that's going to help David because he's about to become the king. But David does not want anybody to think that he is, happy in this moment, or at least relishing this moment, or thinking that this is good because he can become king. Absolutely not. And David is now going to lament the death of Shaul and his best friend Yonatan, along with his brothers, because he wants it to be very clear to the fact that David is not taking this lightly, right? This is a big deal for him before he steps into the limelight of being king. And I think that's what everything here, all of the questions that we've asked really point us in that direction. The story in chapter 31 of the last book, that was the real story. This story maybe was fraudulent on the part of the Amaleki, but David goes right after it because he will not let the narrative of David took over in the wake of Shaul to be the way that was presented to him, right? David never relished the idea of Shaul killed 1,000, David killed tens of thousands. He never bought that idea that he was going to muscle Shaul out, right?
He kept in line with his own.
Correct.
Correct.
Absolutely, which is going to be somewhat ironic and seem unfair when you think about what David is going to have to deal with people trying to muscle him out, push him out.
And somehow this is like he made a mistake here because it seems like he's saying, how could you kill the king? And then later, like,
I don't know that it's because of that. I think there'll be other things that will happen in the interim that those rebellions will explain. I don't think it has to do this. I personally think David acted above and beyond in this. Yeah, I think he did the right thing in this situation.
Did we come up with an answer about their Amalek?
In most commentaries, if you look at Chamuvadia, I'm not going to read it now, but it's in his Purim book actually, because that's where Amalek is discussed. He says we do. We do accept. Yeah. He says that's not why he killed him. He killed him for the reasons that we've illustrated now. That's why I like that. I like that approach better, right? Before we move on to the lamentation, I mentioned to you the parallels between Shaul's death and Eli HaKohen's death. So for those who have been with us the whole time, but even if not, go back into your memory bank, turn a bunch of pages, right? At the early part of the book of Shemuel Aleph, we had almost the identical situation, almost identical. The Jews go to battle against the Philistines, same people. They suffer a devastating defeat. Somebody escapes the battlefield, right? Runs back. We don't get who his name is. Keep that in mind for a minute. The Tanakh does not tell us who his name is, just like it doesn't tell us this person's name either, just his nationality, where he came from. He comes back to Eli. He tells him what happened. And in the report, somebody dies. Who dies in this case? Eli falls back on his chair at the news that his sons died and the Aron was confiscated, and he cannot bear it, and he's old, and he falls back on his chair and he dies, as was prophesied, as was told to him in his curse by Shemuel that he would die. It's exactly the same situation, paralleling each other. You know, it's fascinating. We didn't even mention it there. You know who the rabbis say in that story was the one who came back and told Eli about the battle? Doesn't say who the child's name is. You know who they say it was? No. Shaul. They say it was Shaul. Before he was crowned king, the rabbis say it was Shaul who brought the news back. Why do you think the rabbis would say that? Brings the story back into a full circle, right? It's saying the irony is Shaul was the one who reported to Eli about the Jewish people's loss against the Philistines that resulted in Eli HaKohen, the leader of the generations, disgraceful death because Eli goes out with, with a negative, right? He goes out with his corrupt children and his legacy unfulfilled. Well, guess what? Who else is going to experience the exact same thing? Shaul. Shaul and his sons die on the same day, just like Eli and his sons die on the same day. Shaul dies at the hands of the Philistines, so does Eli because of the battle of the Philistines. And Shaul's legacy is unfulfilled. He was the one who was supposed to rid them of the Philistines, and he did not. His legacy is unfulfilled. Shaul and Eli are mirrors of each other. And that's how that story starts with Eli. ends with Shaul, all comes back full circle. We're in exactly the same place. How amazing is it that the rabbis do that? That's a technique that the rabbis do. They take an unidentified character, they put a person in there to bring the whole story back into one thing. It's pretty fascinating. It's a little bit of it's an uncomfortable feeling though, because two great people, Eli HaKohen, right? My family, we still say we're from Eli HaKohen. Eli HaKohen, Shaul, two great people, two great men with legacies unfulfilled. And that's going to lead us into David, who has moments where his legacy could go unfulfilled, but he turns it around. That's going to be the whole thing about David, is we get a third character in this trio who could go the exact same way as Eli and Shaul, but he does a couple of things so differently that turn him the other way. Yeah. That is different. Yeah, we're progressing. We're getting somewhere. But the fact that Shaul and his children die on the same day that Eli and his children die is a pretty interesting crowd. And there's no legacy for Shaul's family. Yeah. So let's do now. This will be new for everybody. We're gonna continue chapter 1 of Shemuel Bet. We're gonna read David's lamentation, his poem over the death of Shaul and his best friend Yonatan. That's in verse 17 of Shemuel Bet, chapter 1. And this again is very important for David to assert himself and assert the idea that the death of Shaul was a tragedy. Vaikonen David et hakina hazot. David intoned the following lamentation: Al Shaul, on Shaul, the Al Yonatan beno, and on Yonatan, his son, which is David's friend. Vayomer, David says, now this next little pasuk is pretty odd. Vayomer lelamed bnei Yehuda kashet. He ordered the men from Yehuda to be taught the bow. Hine ketuva al sefer hayashar. Behold, it is written on the book of the straight. What in the world is this talking about? Very, very odd pasuk, right? This is a good question. It seems like he's saying, right, it doesn't have the quotation marks over there, exactly. Vayomer, he says the lamentation, and then it seems like you could put like a little parentheses around that verse right away, where the narrator sticks in something. He says, by the way, this poem that David's about to say, it means what? A lot of times in Tehillim, you read like, Lam natseach ala binginot mizmor le David. What does that mean? What does that opening line mean? Right? Lam natseach ala sheminit mizmor le David. Right? For people who read Tehillim, you've heard those phrases before. What are they all about? Sometimes the occasion, sometimes the writer. A lot of people say it has to do with musical instruction. How to play the music for this poem. So sheminit, people say, is like an octave, 8, sheminit octave, what octave to play it on. Lam natseach is what instruments should be competing with each other. Let's never forget, I know we read Tehillim and we kind of read it, just reading it with intonations, but it was meant to be poetry and it was meant to be song. It was meant to be played with musical accompaniment. So many people learn those opening verses in books of Tehillim as being the author's way, whether it's David or some other author, about how the music of this song should sound. If only when the Beit HaMikdash is eventually rebuilt, we'll know how to play the music to these songs, how inspiring would those things be. So some people learn that that's what this is. Lelamed bnei Yehuda kashet, to teach the people of Yehuda the bow, how to play like with a violin or a harp or some kind of bow instrument, the following lamentation, which has also been written, Hine ketuva al sefer hayashar, which was written on a book called the Book of Yashar. The rabbis of the Gemara, I don't want to get too deep into it, they debate what is this sefer hayashar. There's 3 opinions that are offered in the Gemara. Anybody want to take a stab what the sefer hayashar might be? I'll give you a hint. There are other books in the Tanakh. Tehillim is not one of them that it's offered, actually. Right? So some people say it's talking about the book of Bereshit, that actually this lamentation is hinted to within the book of Bereshit. Why is Bereshit called the book of the Yashar, the book of the straight? Because what does it talk about? The fathers and the mothers, who are considered Yesharim, the straightest of all people. And they say that it's hinted to in the blessing of Yaakov. When Yaakov blesses the people of Yehuda, he says, Yadecha, your hand should be be'oref oivecha, in the neck of your enemies. How do you have somebody who in war battles somebody from the neck? How do you battle somebody from the neck? Not with swords. Swords, you're going to fight with each other face to face with a bow and arrow. You're going to shoot at them from the back. So he says that's the idea of teaching the B'nai Yehuda Keshet, the bow and arrow, how they're going to fight from the back. It's all these things are like a little deep and cryptic. Other people say Sefer HaYashar is the book of Devarim, because it says Ish HaYashar, it says V'asita HaYashar v'hatov b'nei Hashem, you should do it straight in the eyes of God. Other people say it's the book of Shoftim, because who remembers the major line from the book of Shoftim that has the word Yashar in it? Oh, I'm really testing my students, huh? The book of Shoftim repeats over and over again. Ish hayashar be'enav ta'aseh. Now you know how all the other girls feel in the Pirkei Avot class. This is how it is. Right? Ish hayashar be'enav ta'aseh. The pasuk and shit. So they're all trying to make these connections to Yashar. I like that Al-Bag's approach. He says there must have been some other book book that was written down, all these songs and poetry and things like that we lost today. And this was also written in that book, but thank God it's also written here and we have it recorded over here.
It says over here, the book was a collection of ancient poems commemorating events of national importance.
Great. Yeah. And there's other books, by the way, that are references in Torah. There's a book referenced in the Torah in Bamidbar. It's called Sefer Milchamot Hashem, the book of the wars of God. We don't exactly know. So it seems as though the Torah references, according to some people, Torah references other books that existed in the world. According to other approaches, whenever the Torah references a book, it means one of its own books within its Tanakh. Two different approaches of how to look at it. We'll leave that on the side anyway. Other people, I'll give one last interpretation, say that this was actually part of David's lamentation. It was part of David's lamentation because he said, who suffered the worst loss? Which tribe suffered the worst loss of all of the tribes in this battle? Not Yehuda, Binyamin. Why Binyamin? Shaul and his children were from Binyamin, so it stands to reason that Shaul took his people in the highest of numbers and fought next to him, and they suffered the most casualties. And the rabbis say that what was Binyamin known for very much? They were the what? They were the archers. They had that skill. So now what did we lose? We lost all our archers. So what does David say? Lelamed b'nei Yehuda kashet. We have to now teach the children of Yehuda, who I'm going to take the place as king. We have to teach them how to shoot because we lost all of our archers. We have to phrase up our military. We have to strengthen our fighting techniques because we lost so many people in this last battle. It's another way of looking at it. Yeah.
At first glance, when you first read it, I saw it as something that David said, and I think there's something very special about the bow and arrow. It's straight, it's yashar.
Mhm.
Maybe he's like, it sounded like a lesson to me that he was telling them. I think that's, less violent than other means of, I don't know, I just saw it as a more elevated form.
So maybe David over here is saying that underneath of it is we have to work on ourselves spiritually.
Yeah.
Like we have to teach each other the straightness of the bow and arrow. Maybe we've suffered casualties because we were being wayward. Jewish people don't lose for no reason. It's a very nice idea. Very nice idea. I like that idea a lot. I'll see if do some more research and see if there are any other commentaries who mention it. It's worth noting now that you just brought that up. I'll respond to that. The rabbis often look at the bow and arrow, though, in a little bit of a different way. They look at it actually in a negative way. Why do they look at the bow and arrow as a negative way? They say it's a way of fighting from what? Fighting from a distance from behind. What evil act do they compare to shooting a bow and arrow? What avera? Lashon hara. Right? The rabbis compare lashon hara to shooting a bow and arrow because you can harm someone without being face to face with them at a distance, and you keep yourself protected. Right? So that's a little bit of a different. No, it doesn't disprove the fear. It's just an interesting thing to note that these different weapons, based on the context, might have a different symbolism, right? Different symbolism to it. It's interesting. Things to think about, things to ponder. In any event, we go to now we get to the lamentation itself, the teeth of it, in verse 19. You'll notice these pisukim are going to be little short ones. It's a poem. Hatzvi Yisrael al bamotecha halal. You glory, O Israel. Hatzvi is an interesting line. It's always the tzvi over here is talking about the glory of the Jewish people. Tzvi means like a deer, but here it has a little bit of a different meaning, right? Your glory, O Israel, al bamotecha halal, lies slain on your heights. Bamot is like you're raised up. Halal means destroyed, killed. Ech naflu giborim. How have the mighty fallen? That's a nice phrase, by the way, to keep in your just like speech. When you see somebody who like was once a great person and then they make a mistake. What? It's negative. Ech naflu giborim means how great did they used to be, and now how the mighty have fallen. Exactly. Where are they now? You don't want anybody to say about you, Ech naflu giborim, right? That's not something you want people to say about you. In this context, David is saying it in a tragic way. Like, look what has happened to our great king who has fallen now, right? Al tagidu begat, al tevasru bechutzot Ashkelon. Do not speak about it in Gat. Gat was one of the cities of the Philistines. Don't tell the news. Don't proclaim the news in the streets of Ashkelon, another one of the Philistine cities. In other words, he's saying, it's tragic that people are talking about this in the Philistine cities. Pen tismachna benot Pelishtim, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Pen ta'alozna benot ha'arelim, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exalt. You could hear the derogatory tone in David's language towards the Pelishtim. He says, we don't want this to be discussed. We don't want them to know. They're gonna rejoice and celebrate over it. Hare bagilboa al tal ve'al matar alechem ustet trumot. Oh, the hills of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain on you, or bountiful fields. In other words, we lost our prosperity, our success. Hisham niga'al magen giborim. It was there that the shield of the warriors lay rejected. Magen Shaul. The interesting that we always call it Magen David, right? Magen Shaul, though, is the language that he uses about Shaul. The shield of Shaul, Beli Mashiach Bashamin, polished with oil no more. David is saying that the place where Shaul died, the mountains of Gilboa, should remain desolate because it's a place of tragedy where Shaul and his family died. Verse 22, Midam halalim mehelev giborim keshet Yonatan lo nasog ahor. From the blood of slain, from the fat of warriors, meaning the choicest of all the warriors, the bow of Yonatan never turned back. In other words, he says, Yonatan, my friend, fought courageously. He refused to turn around and fought to the bitter end, and he was a skilled fighter. Remember we saw the chapter about how Yonatan was shooting the arrows very precisely. He was a great archer. He was doing that to signal David if Shaul wanted to kill him or not and run away, right? So we know he was a skilled archer. And again, that theme of archery coming up. The head of Shaul, on the other hand, the sword of Shaul, lo tashuv rekam, never withdrew empty. Remember, that was the same sword of Shaul that he held with him every time to do what with? What did he want to do? What did Shaul want to do with that sword? He tried to kill David with that sword many times. We often saw that imagery of Shaul lying in wait with his sword, ready to pounce on David. And David says, head of Shaul lo tashuv rekam. The sword of Shaul never withdrew empty. He fought valiantly, he fought courageously. Shaul v'Yonatan ha'ne'ehavim v'ha'ne'imim b'chayehem. Shaul and Yonatan, beloved and cherished, never parted. They never separated from each other. Uvmotam lo nifradu, whether in life or in death. Min nisharim kalu, they were swifter than eagles. Me'arayot gaveru, they were stronger than lions, both physically and spiritually. Verse 24, Benot Israel el Shaul bechena, daughters of Israel, weep over Shaul. Those are the same daughters of Israel who used to say Shaul killed 1,000 and David killed 10,000. That kind of enraged Shaul. David says, cry over the death of Shaul. Hamalbishechem shani im adanim, who clothed you in crimson and finery. Hama'ale adi zahav al levushchem, who decked your robes with jewels and gold. Remember the prosperity, the success that Shaul ushered in his kingdom. There were many high points to Shaul's kingdom where they were successful, where he did win wars, where they enjoyed the spoils. Shaul ushered in a much better time during parts of his monarchy than they had before him. Once again, David repeats the words in 25. Ech naflu giborim betoch hamilchama. How have the mighty fallen in the thick of battle? Yonatan al bamotecha halal. Yonatan is slain in the heights. You can see, by the way, there's a, what do you mean? Yeah. So a refrain keeps going on over and over again. It's possible that this is a refrain that happens multiple times. I'd like to suggest a slightly different structure, which is called an envelope structure or a chiastic structure. Chiastic structure is like A, B, C, B, A. A, B, C, B, A, right? So how does David start? He starts with A, talking about the Bamotecha Halal, the Tzvi Israel, Ech Naflu Giborim, that's A. Then in B, he talks about the Philistines. Then the heart of it is C. That's all about Shaul and Yonatan never separating from each other, their courageous and valiant efforts in battle. Then he goes back to B. Ech naflu giborim. Then he goes back to B about their great. Ech naflu giborim bamotecha halal. And then he finally ends in verse 26. Tsar li alecha achi Yonatan. I'm in pain. I grieve for you, my brother Yonatan. David now singles out Yonatan a little bit more than Shaul. Na'amta li me'od. You were most dear to me. Nifle'ata ahavatecha li. Your love was wonderful to me. Me'ahavat nashim. More than the love of a woman. Ech naflu giborim. How have the mighty fallen? Third time. Vayovedu klem milchama. And the weapons of war perished. So you could see this envelope structure, this idea that their ideas are repeating, centering on one very important idea, which is that David says Shaul and Yonatan fought valiantly. Most importantly, they didn't separate from each other. Now, if you remember back many, many chapters, we noted that the idea that Yonatan didn't separate from Shaul. Do you remember how we spoke about that? That he didn't separate from Shaul. What did we say? What did we say about that? Remember many times David and Yonatan made a covenant after covenant after covenant. And every time we made a covenant, what did we say? We hoped that what? They would stay together, right? That Yonatan would say, David, I'm done with my father. I'm done with him. I'm staying with you. I'm with you. Yonatan never did that. Ultimate honor for his father. He realized that despite the fact that David would take over, he could not abandon his father. He needed to be there for his father. Now we get a sense of how David viewed that. David was happy that he did that. He felt it was the right thing. We as the readers felt like, Yonatan, just stick with David, right? He's your guy. Be his best friend. Your dad wants to kill him. He's doing the wrong thing. And we kept kind of like digging at Yonatan.
I always was happy that, like, I don't think anybody should ever abandon their parent.
Spoken.
Right? Why? Because maybe,
Yeah, from a parent, yeah.
maybe
Parent, grandparent, yeah.
as whatever thoughts and feelings he had towards David and knew what was right, maybe he could be a good
Yeah,
influence
maybe.
on his father to change. I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. No, 100%. That seems to be, David is now for the first time exposing how he looked at that. He brings it as a badge of honor for Yonatan, where he says, they loved each other, ubemotam lo nifradu. In death, they did not separate. David says it was fitting, it was right that Yonatan should die by the side of his father. That's what's fitting. Not that he should have come to me, but that he should have been next to his father when it all went down, right? David is happy that took place. And so although we feel like, I wish that Yonatan would have gone with David, David in the end is happy that Yonatan went with his father. And he laments the fact that he lost his best friend, that his love for each other, their love for each other was unlike anything else, right? More so than the love that he had for his own spouse. And we've seen that David's spousal relationships have been a little rocky, a little shaky, specifically with Michal, right? Who's, by the way, still not in the picture. We'll continue on that point. But I think that's very important. I think that's very powerful. That's what the chiastic structure does. The chiastic structure highlights for you certain ideas, the giborim, the fact that how did they fall, but it sticks to the heart of what it is. The heart of David's lamentation is they fought courageously, although they knew they would lose, and they stuck together. Those are the two most important things. He says that's what we should all take away from Shaul. Despite whatever mistakes we make, despite whatever challenges we don't overcome, failures that we have in life, fight as hard as you can. Never give up. No matter what you think is going to happen in the future, no matter whatever think God tells you is going to be, fight as hard as you can, fight to the bitter end, push as far as you can go. That's Shaul, and that's courageous Shaul. That's what we can learn. And number two is stick with your family. Stick together. Stick with your children, stick with your father, your parents, and as long as you stay together, even if it's in death, so be it. At least you're together, right? At least you did it in the way that was as courageous as possible. And that's what David tries to take away over here. And I think it's a very, very powerful ending to a tragic up and down story, which is Shaul's monarchy. Questions, thoughts, or ideas? Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of references to women in this poem. The Philistine women should have rejoiced. The Jewish woman should cry.
Right.
I love you more than you could love a woman.
Interesting.
And I don't know what it means, but
it's by the way, it's very important just in the technique of Tanakh. If you want Tanakh and studying to grow, it's important to notice those things even if you don't have an explanation for it. To be honest, when I read it, I didn't notice that. It's typical of the women to provide the emotional aspect, the emotional response to things. You're gonna say that? Right. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, yeah, 100% that the women play a role in here, but
in that same chiastic form, because
yeah,
women are in the same place that the Jewish women
correct,
are.
contrasted with each other. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. He got Shaul ba'alafav and David b'ribotav. It's often, it seems that the text will look to women for the response to something, right? For how things should go. What did they see, right? And sometimes they see something on the outside, sometimes they see something on the inside, but the response that the women have is often treated with a level of importance, right? That song, Hika Shaul ba'alafav and David b'ribotav, becomes a centerpiece. It gnaws away at Shaul. It actually turns the tide of the whole relationship. For David, he tries to ignore it, right? And here he tries to tell the women, cry, lament over Shaul. Because if they're not crying, David says it's the wrong response. It means you're not finding the right thing. He's looking to prod them into giving the right response to spread that to the people, because people are going to look to the women for the right emotional response and how we deal with something, how we pick up the pieces. Yeah, exactly, 100%.
Women took the lead in the public lamentation as they still do.
Yes. The Mishnayot in Mishnayot all over the place talk about, like, for example, there's a bunch of Mishnayot in a Masechet called Moed Katan, which discusses a lot about burial practices, funeral practices, and things like that. It talks about when a person passes away on a holiday, what types of lamentations the women can do, what types of lamentations the women couldn't do. Could the women cry? Could the women raise their voice? Could they sing? Could they do this? Could they do that? It's very interesting. I don't want to bring up something controversial, but it seems that the women played a very integral part in funeral proceedings, right? It seems very clear that they did, right? They were the ones who provided the emotional support, the emotional reaction to how people are going to do, because women are keen on emotions, right? It's interesting that I note that, because I know in our community, there's a bit of a conversation about what role women should take, should women speak, should not, this and that. And that's not for me to get into it now. Certainly not. No, I'm not interested in taking, not now, definitely not now. But the point, yeah, I do. But I think, but the point is that's clearly there. I think that importance is that women are the emotional barometers for what's going on in the society and the thing. That's definitely a point that I think could be brought out here. I wonder if any other commentaries speak a little bit more about the role of women. We'll maybe take a little bit of a deeper dive into it. I'll do some research and see what we can find. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, Em Sisra, right? When going back to the book of Shoftim, when the Jewish people, Devorah and Barak, who that story is also led on the Jewish side by a woman, Devorah, right? Who sings the song to provide the emotional response to the Jewish people in the wake of their victory, right? So Devorah and Barak, it's being led by a woman. And that's also, by the way, another story. That's a good story where women play a massive role. That whole chapter is about women's role. So I'll take you back because we don't have much time anyway, but go back to the book of Shoftim in that battle. So Devorah is the leader of the Jewish people, a woman, who kills Sisera, Yael, a woman, right? And the ultimate response to the death of Sisera is made by the mother of Sisera, to which Devorah says, the mother of Sisera is looking out the window, saying, where is my son? His chariot is delayed in coming back. When will he be back? What will he do? Blah, 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 right? And Devorah uses that as the sign for the grief, the pain of a mother towards her child not coming back, right? Where do the rabbis take that? Anybody know? Rosh Hashanah. Right. The rabbis say when we blow the shofar, do you know how we learn to blow the shofar and the different sounds? It's to mimic the cries of the mother of the woman of Sisera, mother of Sisera. It's to mimic the cries, the wail. Why? Why? Because it's mimicking the cries of a mother for her child, right? Say what you want about Sisera. He was a wicked person. We're not happy that he did die. Kill him. But what Devorah was picking on, what she was plucking out, was the emotional response of a mother to the loss of her child, which there is no more devastating loss. A mother and child are naturally intertwined. We talked about this in our Pirkei Avot class, right? The fact that a mother carries a child inside of her attaches them. They're attached when they're together. They're attached when even though the umbilical cord is cut, right? The physical cord is cut. There's an emotional, spiritual cord that never is cut between a mother and a child. Fathers and their children don't have that. I actually explained that's why a father has to work hard. A father has an obligation to teach his child Torah because he has to create that spiritual bond that is embedded already in it between a mother and child, right? So when Sisera is waiting for her son to come home and he doesn't, and she's wailing, the rabbis say, grab that wail and wail it on Rosh Hashanah, because what does it also represent? Who's the mother? Who's the child?
It's all this. Hashem's their father. Hashem's their father.
Yeah.
Father.
Yeah. Hashem is Avinu in many ways.
That's like the main thing you hear.
But here, in that, maybe we'll use parent, but here, I think the opposite. I think here, what the rabbis are saying is, a father, of course, a father's there for their child, no question. But a father-child relationship can be undone.
So you know how they say.
Crazy as it sounds, right?
Like
Yeah.
When a person, God forbid, is ill, and one person prays for them, it's always
In the name of their mother.
in the name of their mother. And I asked, what about when they go to the Torah and they're saying it's always the son of
The father.
Of the father. And they said because the mother is the one that you go to for the emotional, exactly everything that you're saying, the emotional.
Right.
thing
But the
that
father's the one you
happens.
go to when you get to the Torah. The Torah is what you learn from your father. Right. And there's another simpler explanation, but people don't love this explanation, is your identity as a person, your identity as a Jew is determined by your mother. Your tribal identity is determined by your father. So when you go up to the Torah, you often go up to the Torah depending on your tribal identity. So if I'm a Kohen, that's determined by my father, and I get Aliyat Kohen. If I'm a Levi, Batash, Shama, whatever it is, you go up as a Levi, that's based on your father. So the reason why we declare the person's father at the Torah is to make the announcement, he's worthy of going Kohen, he's worthy of going Levi, because based on his father, what his tribal affiliation is. When it comes to other things, we always use the mother to show the person is Jewish. Another difference, I don't know how much you're going to like this one, but I'll say it anyway. It's there. I'll say it there. I probably shouldn't preface with that. I probably should just say it and see what you guys think. Actually, they say a person never truly knows who his father is, right? That was a hard one. Yeah.
For a man.
You know what?
For a man.
For men, when you tell this to men, they get very bothered by it. What do you mean you don't know who my father is? In the end of it, meaning the fact that a woman carries the child for 9 months, it's impossible to debate who the mother is, right? Okay, no, we're not making the claim that we think that women are all over the place when it comes to that. That's not what we're trying to say. But the idea is that there's a certain tight attachment that you have to your mother that you don't have with the father, right? And so I guess that's the reason why when we're saying on Rosh Hashanah, going back to Rosh Hashanah, when what we're trying to do is we're saying we're almost coming back to God like as a child to their mother. God, you know what it's like to have a mother.
Have the sympathy. The fathers are more known as
Fathers are the
maybe
disciplinarian.
So maybe we're appealing to Hashem, who is that father.
Yeah.
Reminding him to those maternal instincts.
Yes. There is
We want mercy, right?
yes, 100%. So we were always, it's funny because God, again, male and feminine towards God, it's a hard one, right? But we always speak in ways that we as human beings can understand. There's definitely, we often speak to God, sometimes in the masculine, sometimes in the feminine, right? So we often use verbiage and that is masculine, avinu, things like that, right? We talk to God as if he's a zachar, but there's also a concept that God's Shekhinah. The word Shekhinah, meaning his presence, but what type of word is that? It's a feminine word, right? For those who remember back to their school teachings, right? A word that ends in a kamatz hey is always a feminine word. So when we talk about God from the Shekhinah perspective, his divine presence, it's always in the feminine, right? So there's always a masculine side and a feminine side. And then in Kabbalah, there's a judgment side, din, and then there's a charge of rahamim. Here's a good one. Where does the word rahamim come from? Rehem. Rehem means womb. It's feminine. Mercy and compassion. So God is your parent. That's why I like that. God is your parent. He's your Av, he's your father. He's also, it's a weird thing to say, but he's your mother. He relates to us as a father and as a mother, as a parent in both situations, whether it's judgment when we need it, tough love, when it's more compassion and mercy when we need it. And on Rosh Hashanah, when we're trying to shake the heavens up to have a good judgment, and we're in the day of judgment, to blow the sound of the cries of Sisra, of the mother of Sisra, to quote unquote, awaken God, or have him remember the idea that we are his child and he is our Shekhinah, our divine presence, our mother in a sense. That sentiment is very, very, very powerful, right? And so women are definitely the emotional catalyst within the people. They're the ones who can measure emotion and measure a response, have those connections in. It's a very powerful idea. Maybe that is why feminine and women are mentioned here, and how they cry and how they relate to Shaul is important to David to spread the message of how we should be feeling now in the wake of this terrible tragedy. Other questions, comments, or thoughts? See, that was not planned. This is what happens when we discuss and we talk and you notice within the text what happened. So we'll pause here. Be'ezat Hashem, next week we'll go into chapter 2. We'll start back chapter after chapter. And I hope that you'll join us as we continue through Shemuel Bet. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.